So today we're talking about the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring. And if you're following along in the book, we're covering the prologue and the first chapter, A Long Expected Party. But if you're following along with the movies, we're talking about just the first 32 minutes in Fellowship, which, I was honestly thinking that it was going to be less than that for some reason, but it is like a solid 32 minutes and 4 seconds. Now, on a very broad level, it's interesting to think about the different ways in which the books and movies are framed. It kind of goes back to our last episode where we talked about the different things adaptations choose to focus on. For example, you can see at the beginning how this book is really set up to be a sequel to The Hobbit. Like the beginning of the prologue, it starts with a section literally called Concerning Hobbits, of stuff about pipeweed, stuff about the way the Shire is constructed, their government system, sort of. It's really, and I was thinking about this because I just recently reread The Hobbit, and at the end it says something about if you're interested in learning more about hobbits, check out Lord of the Rings, and it's so funny because it's ultimately Fellowship, well, it is like a sequel to The Hobbit, but it's really not in a lot of ways. It's not really just about Bilbo. It's not like more Bilbo adventures, right?
Right.
It becomes this much bigger story and it has a lot more behind it, and it's not so much a coming of age, but like saving the world type of thing.
Love the
But
saving the world.
yes, but so you can see how I think for a big chunk of these first few episodes, we're going to be seeing Tolkien kind of working through it being a sequel to The Hobbit and it becoming Lord of the Rings, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It
So
does.
we have that stuff, and then Peter Jackson's team starts essentially with content from the appendices, stuff about the Second Age, giving larger context and background to set up the conflict we're about to see. And I thought that was really interesting because, with the movies, I mean, you can't. There was no Hobbit movie yet, obviously, and you like the Tolkien, it was still a hugely influential in fantasy. Was translated into every country by that time, like so many languages, was like a huge seller, but at the same time I don't think it had like the cultural, like mm, what's the word that I want there, just maybe significance, but maybe just like influence, that it does post movie. So you couldn't have, you have to write it as if nobody knows what anything is about to happen in the movies.
Yeah.
So it makes a lot of sense to me that and I think it was a really cool choice to, instead of just opening straight up with Bilbo's, party, they talk, they give it like this more like they set up the ancient feel of the world right away, with Galadriel's opening lines and the last alliance of elves and men. um so I thought that was one of it's probably like the first big change that they made, from
hmm
the books, and I think it worked really, really well.
I thought it was gorgeous.
Yeah, and also just let Kate Blanchett narrate My Whole Life, please.
Right. Like she needs to have like audiobook deals and just like start narrating random news bits because she is a shining star.
Yeah, I think that is one thing that just broadly, movies versus books, you can get a ton of detail, and we will get into a ton of detail about the books, and there is so much description, there's a lot more lore, like I was just saying about even the hobbits, and you can tell a lot about the prologue. There's footnotes and stuff where it's I feel like he wrote it after the fact because he references stuff about Frodo, and at that point nobody knows who Frodo is,
hmm
if you are opening the book for the first time. But you know, it feels like written for someone who's reading the books over and over again. But where in the books, you're really imagining everything. You're getting all of the details, like you're getting timelines, and you're getting all of these things that like enrich the world one way, but then with like hearing the actors actually saying the lines and like the delivery and the way that I think that that helps cement them into your brain in like a totally different way. um and like the music and like seeing the visuals on screen, I think there is something, I mean that is what movie magic is, right? Like the transportive factor, that where you literally feel like you're somewhere else for a few hours.
Yes, I would have to say there are certain like famous quotes in Lord of the Rings. Uh, Kate Blanchett's introduction is definitely one big swath of them. And if I were to read the books, there's no way I could read that information without hearing her, you know?
Yeah, and you know what is super funny about that is that I can't either. Those lines are actually from Treebeard in Return of the King. Essentially, after everything happens, there's kind of like a traveling party where they go to Rohan, and like Eowyn stops off with Faramir, and then they go to Isengard to see what the dealio is, and Galadriel and Celeborn are there, and Treebeard says to them that the world has changed. You know, I feel it in the earth. You know, I smell it in the air. He says that to Galadriel about how he doesn't think they're ever going to meet again. Like, this is the first time they've met, and they will probably never see each other again.
Hmm.
So, like, completely different context. And it's supposed to be in Treebeard's voice. Do I hear it as Kate Blanchett? Absolutely, I do. And it's like, whoa, you know, it's like, it's so funny how, you know, that is like the contexts are totally different, right? But it's just
Yeah,
so iconic that it's that way in my brain now.
of course.
So we open with her describing how it's funny, like she puts it like it all began with these three rings, and that's like, or with the rings of power, right? And I'm like, debatable, because like like yes, insofar as like how we ended up here for this story. And I do think they put it together very cool, the way that they go all the way from the creation of the rings to the last alliance of elves and men, Isildur losing the ring and Gollum finding it, and then Bilbo, right? And that is what gets us to like present day, essentially.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think that is done really super well. Um, but it is you know, pretty big departure from the book. Like in the book, all of them I think do open with the poem. I'm literally looking at my book. Yeah, they all open with the three rings for the elven kings under the sky, seven for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, nine for mortal men doomed to die, one for the dark lord on his dark throne. So she's like explaining the poem,
Hmm.
right? Um, but I know, Anna, in your notes, you had asked like who were those elves that.
Yeah, who are the other ones?
So like um that is interesting, because I think in the movie they're showing Gilgalad and Círdan and Galadriel, but at the time of the movie, it's Galadriel, Gandalf, and Elrond that all have the rings. So I'm gonna go backwards now to the part that they kind of gloss over with the rings. So they make it seem like uh they kind of make it sound as if, like, correct me if this is the not the impression that they give, but I think the impression that the speech at the beginning gives, and of course, like, you don't, it's one of the things where it's like it doesn't really matter if you have all the context, but um ultimately, but like I think the impression that they give with the way Galadriel walks you through that is that um Sauron somehow gave the rings to the elves, to the dwarves, to the men, and then goes and makes the One Ring.
I didn't have that impression. I had the
Okay.
impression that like there is chaos. Everyone is trying to control chaos. So 3 rings were made for the elves, 7 for the dwarves, 9 for men. Is that what you
Mm-hmm.
said? Um, and then Sauron was like, excuse me, I'm a bad bitch. I'm gonna make one too for me because I'm gonna control all the dark shit. And that was the ring.
It made it sound to you like each like race was making their own rings, or who do you is it unclear where the rings came from to you?
It's unclear where the rings came from, but that elves, dwarves, and men were kind of like all in cahoots with each other when they were
Yeah.
doing this, and Sauron was off on his own making his bad boy ring.
Yeah. Well, fun fact. Okay, so we're just going to give like a brief overview of the stuff that happens in the Second Age. And I think that this will be good context to have for when we go into the Rings of Power in September, you know? So, essentially, so the Second Age, most of a big chunk of Middle Earth, most of Beleriand is like destroyed, and then as many people escape or whatever to the rest of Middle Earth, or they're given Numenor, right? So Sauron somehow is one of those escapee boys from Morgoth stuff, who was like original baddie, like I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned last time. So he disguises himself as like another elf, or maybe a Maiar, like maybe like a lesser god, but essentially like a pretty. He's very fair to look upon, right? And he calls himself Anatar, which means Lord of Gifts. And he attempts to seduce the elves, tried to be like, hey, let's be friends. And people like Gilgalad and Elrond are like, no, you seem very sus. And so then he goes to the elves of Eregion, who we will see remnants of their work with like the Doors of Moria. So they were like right next to the dwarves near the Misty Mountains and had like a partnership with them and were really friendly with them, honestly. And so the main elf there is Celebrimbor, and he ends up making all of the rings of power with Sauron. I don't totally recall why they were making rings. I think it was like Celebrimbor was, they were both into crafting. I think that was very much something that they both were interested in, and Sauron was, as Anatar, was like promoting himself as like, oh, like I'm a, his name is Lord of Gifts. He was like trying to like teach them things while also clearly learning from the elves of Region. And so they make all the rings of power together except for the 3 for the elves, but Celebrimbor uses the knowledge that Sauron gives him for to make those rings. And then Sauron sneaks off to Mordor and makes the one with the idea that he could control all of the 19 rings or whatever it
Okay.
is.
Okay.
And then eventually we lead to um, Isildur getting the ring. And that's one thing that like I found really interesting about over on Don Marshall's page on TikTok. He has like T-shirts that say "Yeet Isildur," like as if Elrond should have thrown him into the fires of Mount Doom with the ring to destroy it, so then we wouldn't have had Sauron.
Definitely had
Uh,
that thought when I was rewatching the movie. Like, why didn't you just push him? Who gives
well,
out of the door? That's it.
yeah, it's interesting because, well, I think for Tolkien, the intentions behind the action are almost more important than the action itself. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so like Elrond doing that, and I think that Tolkien is really big on like second chances or like letting people come to their own things. Like even in the First Age, like even Melkor after, so he's one of like the gods, and he messes things up for Middle Earth, and they put him in the Void, so like very big timeout. And then eventually they're like, well, let's see if he's changed.
Yeah.
And he's
But
just worse.
that physical isolation. Let's see if that did him any good.
Yeah. So yeah, so they so I think that that is a big part of why Elrond could never, but also I think that the movie kind of paints him, not just him, but like most men. Like, what was the line that she says? The hearts of men are easily corrupted, and it makes it sound like being corrupted by the ring is definitely. It's like a character flaw of all humans. You know, like some kind of thing that is wrong with them, but Gandalf and Galadriel in the story also talk about how the ring would like they would be corrupted by the ring just as easily
Hmm.
as anyone else. So I'm really hoping that the rings of power get to show more of Isildur. I know that he's going to be like a character, but I hope that he really gets to play like a big part because I think that the same way that like kind of we'll see later with Boromir, I think that there's a lot of like misunderstanding of him as a character if within the movies, maybe not so much the books, but like what's same with Isildur is that like he is actually a pretty cool character. Like he's one of the guys that like when they were still living in Numenor, like is standing up to Sauron when he's there and kind of like ruining everything, and he's the one that saves fruits or seeds from the white tree that they have there in Numenor,
Oh,
and brings it to Middle Earth,
oh,
and is why Gondor has the white tree to begin with.
what
So
a detail. I mean,
I know he was pretty cool. He was pretty
yeah.
cool. So yeah, I hope we get to see more of that. I hope that they get to be like really fully fleshed out characters, like Isildur, Elendil, his dad, his brother for sure.
Hmm.
Uh, So that's one of my hopes for the show.
That would be interesting
Yeah.
to
So
see it
then
from
we
a different
get
side.
say what?
To see it from a different side.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's got a lot of potential for reframing how people think about the men of Middle Earth.
Yeah, it's not good. That's like when you're just watching Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, it's
Like
so
those guys
interesting.
are dope.
Yes, like constantly. Like Boromir, I feel like there's a lot of Boromir slander. And then, with Faramir, they change him a
Yes.
lot. I think Denethor is even, like there is like Denethor isn't so obviously like horrible in the books.
Because there's that like sticky guy who is like weird with Eowyn.
Wormtongue? Yeah. I think he's just icky though.
Okay. He was like
Yeah.
not good.
Yeah. Yeah, but it'll be interesting to see how they tackle Numenor because there is a point where, the men are, I would say, overall like closer to the elves and like attitude and like philosophy of
Mhm.
things. Like for example, they're like seafaring because they live on an island, and they become great mariners, and they discover Middle Earth for themselves that way, and they at first are like using it to teach um the men of Middle Earth. So like the Numenorians are different from the rest of the men of Middle Earth because they are of the lines of men that helped defeat Morgoth at the end of the First Age, and the gods gifted them this island and like really long lives, like 500-year lifespans. Um, and then, so in the beginning, they're real cool and building lots of amazing things, and they're teaching the men of Middle Earth stuff that they know, and like, helping people grow culturally,
Mhm.
helping them learn new crafts and stuff. But then as time goes on, they become more jealous of the elves, and they are, thinking that they want to live forever, essentially. And eventually Sauron tricks them into thinking that the elves took their long lifespans from the gods in Valinor, and that all
Ooh,
they have to do is go get it. And that's how we get the destruction of Numenor. But so during that
sweet.
time when they're getting corrupted and uh, by Sauron, they switch to more of like a colonizer-y vibe in Middle Earth. They start taking over places. They start, and that's and I don't think that they're like doing horrible things to people or anything, but they are kind of like asserting themselves as like the boss of the other men in
Mhm.
Middle Earth. So it'll be really, and not all Numenorians are like that, but it'll be really interesting to see how they handle that in the show, and how
Yeah,
much they'll handle of that in the show.
it sounds that it would make pretty captivating TV. So hopefully they do.
Yeah, I hope so too, because it's when you get to the point of like compressing the timeline, like, is it gonna be like, boom, destruction of Beleriand, boom, Sauron's sneaking up making rings, boom, they're gonna war? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I hope that they do get enough time to play, and like, but we already know that there's gonna be like 20 plus main characters or something, so I
Yeah.
hope
How do you do
that.
the story justice and make us care about all these different characters?
Yeah, so surely they're gonna be showing us all like the many different things going on in Middle Earth at this time.
Mhm.
I don't know how they're gonna do the whole, if with the compression of the timeline, like the whole death thing, like the men being afraid of death, because that's like their big motivator towards the end.
Mhm.
But remains to be seen. Remains
We
to be
got a
seen.
few months.
Yeah, and we'll just be here speculating the whole time.
Oh yeah.
So, with all that said, with knowing that Sauron is probably going to be a cutie patootie, I saw in your notes that you would like to see Bill Skarsgård play Sauron.
Yes. So welcome to my TED Talk about Bill Skarsgård. I think he is a very attractive human, and he has kind of nestled himself into, some would say typecast. Some would say, he's just working with what he got. But he has a very spooky era to him. Like he plays Pennywise in It, but he's obviously all covered up. He's a vampire in Hemlock Grove. It's an Eli Roth vampire werewolf TV show on Netflix. Um, and I've also just seen him like little bits and pieces, cameos type thing in other uh, darker shows. Um, and then he was recently one of the monsters in the Internals, which is a really weird surprise.
Oh, really?
Uh, yeah, because he just has this voice for just like being a bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think someone who is supposed to be attractive and deceitful, I think the way he portrays his characters, that would that would mesh perfectly. But understandably, sometimes large TV shows like this, they on purpose don't cast people who are, like famous or like, have a name to themselves. Like I don't know if there's anyone who we've seen before other than my boy Baby Ned. Who's gonna know that Baby Ned is in Lord of the Rings. Um,
And
because he's
everybody,
got such
Baby
a
Ned I mean, if you're a fan of Game of Thrones, you already know, but Baby Ned is Elrond.
he plays Elrond. He plays Ned in the flashbacks.
Yeah.
That Bran has of
Mm-hmm.
his father. Um, but he's like the only, for me, the only recognizable person in the show. So I
Same.
highly doubt that they would drop like a quote unquote major celebrity in this show. But
Yeah, and people have been
that,
speculating about like who's gonna play him, but I don't think they're gonna tell us. Like they did drop a ton of those character posters, right? But
mm-hmm.
I don't think if Sauron is in there, it's not the one that you think it is, and it's probably like him looking cute, or maybe he's not even in it. I don't know. I don't know. They're gonna keep that one close to the chest because I think that they, like we've mentioned before, that this is not going to be made for Silmarillion fans. Like most people aren't going to know that Sauron was ever a cutie, and so I think that is probably going to be one of their big reveals at some point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But so I don't know how they're going to do that. Maybe they'll even trick us. I don't know, but it kind of seems like that'll be hard to do because it's like going to be like whoever decides to start making rings.
They're like,
If
"What you
somebody,
doing over there?"
yeah. Yeah, I'm super interested to see how they do that because I would like to be surprised. You know?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And so that was a really what was that? Like a divergent from the what happens in the movie. But
Yeah,
hey, that's what you're here for.
Sauron the hottie. We've established this. Okay.
It's canon.
Yeah.
Most of that show probably won't be canon. Not everything we're gonna talk about is canon, but that is canon. So okay, so that puts us at Bilbo finding the ring, um, him getting it from Gollum, and then cut to uh the day. So it's interesting because in the movie, it's the day of Bilbo's party. Like that night, they're gonna have the party. In the
Mhm.
book, it's essentially like a few weeks before. So they're giving us like all these details about like dwarves coming to deliver toys from Dale, from uh Erebor, like from the dwarves that that he traveled with, and people and
Oh,
men of Dale. So he's like ordering toys and presents from around the country because for hobbits on their birthdays they give away presents.
okay.
And I think Tolkien writes that detail in there that I mean I think it's kind of quirky and cute. Like you're the idea is that most hobbits are getting a present of some kind most days of the year. But later Bilbo says that he's doing that, like that he, put all these preparations into it to try to make leaving the ring with Frodo easier. And it didn't
Okay.
work, but he did try to do to kind of like work up giving away all this stuff.
Yeah.
Um which I think was really I think I'm like, Bilbo, you are just the sweetest little baby. Like, you poor thing. He didn't ask for any of this. And Frodo
No.
certainly didn't.
No, he did not.
Yeah. So so that gets us to Bilbo, and then Bilbo does get to in the extended edition. That's one of the reasons why I love the extended edition is that they have like Bilbo explaining hobbits to the audience, and I think that feels very appropriate. So that you
Mhm.
still get some of that concerning hobbits stuff, as far as like the nature of hobbits and what they're like in there, which I think is pretty cute.
Yeah.
So then Bilbo is and then we see Frodo and Gandalf, and like that doesn't really happen in the book, but I
Hmm.
think it was a really so like it's really just Bilbo and then cut to Gandalf and Bilbo mainly, and then the party. And we don't really see much of Frodo until after the party, a little bit during the party. So I think that was a great way to introduce his character, to show like get a little back and forth with Gandalf. You get a little bit of like a sense of who Gandalf is before he
Mhm.
goes
Mhm.
into Bilbo. But pretty much every scene with Bilbo and Gandalf is really faithful. Like Gandalf and Bilbo have two conversations in the movie, but it's really like one conversation in the book and they break it up.
Okay.
But I think it works really good. I mean, it's like they are taking it almost word for word. So
Ooh.
super faithful in that sense. And Frodo, getting to see more of him at the party, I think was great. Introducing Sam. You see him for a hot second when Bilbo is describing uh, how hobbits love things that grow, which I thought was super
Mhm.
cute because he's a gardener. And then Frodo encouraging Sam to dance with Rosie at the party is adorable.
Yes.
We also get Merry and Pippin introduced here, which I know that Merry ends up in the book. He helps. I can't remember when Pippin pops up, but Merry helps Frodo kind of clear out more of Bilbo's stuff after Bilbo leaves, because Bilbo leaves a bunch of stuff behind for people to take, like kind of as like joke gifts. Like
Okay.
there's like one relative that never responds to letters, so Bilbo gifted them like a gold pen and ink. So stuff like that, or like there's like,
Get your act together.
huh?
There's like get your gack together.
Yeah, it's like it's
Write your
very
letters.
like passive aggressive gift giving. Or Tolkien writes it like he gives them, like some of them are kind of rude, but some of them are where the gifts will be needed or most used, is how he puts
Mhm.
it, which I think was cute. Um, but Merry and Pippin we get to see at the party with the
Yep.
fireworks. Um, And there's like two things about the fireworks. So first, when Gandalf sets them off on his way to Bag End to
Mhm.
Bilbo's house, he sets them off for all those kids. In the book, he goes, "No, like you'll see plenty of them at the party. I'm not gonna blow them up right now." And it's like,
Oh.
aw. But then they are very spectacular at the party. But I do kind of love that he does that because it is very satisfying
It is a
for.
very cute moment.
Yeah, it's adorable. And then at the party when Merry and Pippin steal the big firework and it's like the dragon thing, that was very much planned by Gandalf. Like Gandalf sets it off and it's like to kind of rustle people up and remind people about Bilbo's story with the dragon and Erebor and all of that.
Mhm.
But in the movie, I think it's a great opportunity to introduce them, honestly, because uh, while I would have liked to see more of like, how the interaction with Frodo and Sam is so sweet at the party, like encouraging him to go dance. I wish that there had been more of like an introduction that showed us how close Merry and Pippin are to Frodo,
Mhm.
because truly in the book they help Frodo move. So like in getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but it's like it's so hard to keep us all because the movies move so fast, right?
Right.
But in the book they essentially help Frodo move, like he does like it makes it like a big show of like I'm moving, instead of, because he doesn't want people to like talk or to like spread rumors about why he left, or to, for some reason he makes it very clear that he's moving back to where he grew up in Buckland, where Mary grew up.
Okay.
And so that's kind of like where you start to see how close Mary and Pippin are to Frodo, is that they're helping him move and stuff. And I wish that they had done like a moment with the party to show their relationship to Frodo, because then we don't see them again until because it always feels kind of off to me that when they meet in Farmer Maggot's crops in the movie, then
Mhm.
they just literally commit to going all the way to Rivendell with him and then
Yeah.
on for the rest of it. But there's never like a, I don't know, it's never like really explained that they are all really besties. this whole time. I mean, it's clear that they
It's
are. Otherwise, why
implied.
would you do that?
Yeah,
But as far as like setting up their relationship, I feel like they really made effort for Sam and Frodo. But with Merry and Pippin, they just kind of like push them into the story.
absolutely.
We just kind of accept that they go along for that crazy ride.
Yeah.
Um, but hey, it doesn't like really take you out of the moment or anything.
No,
Just when you're
no.
like sitting here thinking about it for hours, like I do.
Yeah.
So I know that you had also had a thought about some thoughts about Bilbo there.
Yeah, there are several things about Bilbo that I think happened both in sort of like the introduction to hobbits and like whisperings that you can uh, assume people are doing at the party. Um, is that people are like really perturbed about the fact that he left and had this adventure. Um, and like the people like give Gandalf like the evil eye when he comes in because he's a disturber of the peace.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but in my eyes, I'm like, he did something crazy. Like, of course, he is going to be obsessed with his own adventure. Like, how I feel like that's common, right? Or that's
Mm-hmm.
totally understandable. But people are really upset that he went. I just don't
Yeah,
understand.
it's so funny because it's like I think that is why so you see that in the beginning of The Hobbit, right? Where he's very much like the Bilbo that we meet at the beginning of that book is, he's very much like, no, like we don't need any crazy things around here. But then he's like, when he realizes he's talking to Gandalf, he's like, oh, like Gandalf with the fireworks and who did X, Y, and Z. Like there's like a part of him that's like, oh wow, that's really cool. And so that's when Gandalf is like, yep, you're definitely going. So,
Oh,
but so then I think Tolkien goes back, and in the Concerning Hobbits part of the prologue, he talks about the different types of hobbit that there are to kind of, I think, explain why Bilbo and Frodo are a little bit different. So, like, I would say that there were these, he calls them like breeds of hobbit, but I don't really love. Maybe like different tribe of hobbits that
okay.
are kind of the ancestors of the hobbits that we see today. And by today, I mean in this book. Um, so there's the Harfoots, the Stores, and the Fallowhides. And the Harfoots, they're actually going to make an appearance in the Rings of Power, which also very interesting to see how the heck they do that, because they don't, that's kind of like the point of the Lord of the Rings, is that this is the first time that hobbits have really started to change anything about the history of the world. So maybe it'll just be like a little storyline. I don't know. But so
Mhm.
there's the Harfoots, which are described as browner of skin, smaller, shorter than other hobbits. They prefer highlands and hillsides, so they're the ones that kind of that have started and continue to live in like tunnels and holes, the way that
Okay.
um, Bilbo's house is set up. His is very fancy. Poorer hobbits have fewer rooms or one room type of thing. But that's how that they're the ones that are like digging the tunnels to live in. And they like to stay settled in one place. They're the most representative variety, is how Tolkien puts it. And I think arguably this is where Bilbo's like Baggins side of the family stems from. They're more of a Harfoot type of hobbit. And then there's
Mhm.
the Stores, who are broader, heavier in build. Feet and hands are larger. They preferred flatlands and riversides, which is like really uncommon with hobbits. Like a lot of hobbits are afraid of the water and the sea and don't know how to swim. They
Mhm.
are less shy of men, and they came west after the Harfoot. So it goes Harfoot, Stores, Fallowhides, insofar as like how they migrated
Okay.
to the Shire, essentially. And then there's the Fallowhides, which are described as fairer of skin and also of hair. And I think this is probably one of the few times that Tolkien uses fair to mean lighter, because in like
Or stuff
comparison
attractive.
to, yeah, usually he means it, he uses it to just say something's like beautiful and, yeah, attractive. But I think in this case it kind of directly mirrors how he describes the Harfoots as like they're browner, these are fairer.
Hmm.
um, Taller, slimmer, lover of trees and woodlands. They are the least numerous. They're more friendly with the elves. So it's funny, he kind of partners them up with like different types of other races. So like the Harfoots are more hang out, chill with the dwarves. Stoors more likely to chill with men, and Falahides more likely to be friends with elves. They had more skill in language and song than in handicrafts, and that's very Bilbo because he's constantly writing poems and reciting poems and writing, his story, genealogies. A lot of hobbits are obsessed with like their own personal histories,
Okay.
and but not all hobbits like know how to read and write. But Bilbo is very much like a learned hobbit.
Ooh.
Um, and they're described as bolder and more adventurous. And Tolkien makes a point to say that this Fallowhidish strain is still seen in the Tooks and the Brandybucks. You know, Pippin, Merry, Bilbo's mom was a Took, and Frodo's mom was a Brandybuck.
Okay.
So I think that's his kind of sneaking it in there that like these guys are built different, you
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
for as to why Bilbo is kind of itching to leave and why he was even ever able to be convinced to go to
Mhm.
the Lonely Mountain in the first place. But it's funny because obviously he's not the only Took. I mean, there's like a whole family of Tooks and there's a whole family of Brandybuck. So like,
Right.
conceivably, Gandalf could have uh, tried to get one of those hobbits involved, but he chose Bilbo because Gandalf is
Well,
usually right
so
about everything. So yeah, but that scene, I just love that scene between it's like Ian Holm, Ian McKellen, just like bringing it. They're both like incredible actors. Like their
mhm.
delivery is so beautiful, and it feels very much like the book in that moment. So yeah, then Frodo walks in, and um Gandalf. So Frodo in the movie he like picks it up off the floor because Gandalf couldn't pick it up, which I think was lovely. And but in the books, Bilbo had already had it in an envelope. Like it was in
Okay.
an envelope with like his a bunch of other documents. Like I want to say will, but I don't know if it was his will. But just like where like the deed to Bag End and all that stuff. So when Bilbo drops that, Gandalf is able to take it and immediately put it on the mantle. But I thought that the way they did it in the movie was really effective as far as Frodo just picking it up so casually, like, oh boy, you don't even know what's about to happen to you.
Right.
And then Gandalf gingerly offering him the envelope, like, put it in here, seals it, says, put it away. I gotta go figure some stuff out.
Yeah, and I I think it's interesting that like the amount of trust that Frodo had of Gandalf that I mean it's sus. Like a piece of jewelry that looks very unordinary. He's like he seals it, puts it in an envelope, and is like, don't think about this, put it away, don't touch it. And Frodo's like, okay, that wasn't a weird interaction at all. you know? So like
Yeah, it's funny because it's like Frodo knows that the ring makes you invisible. And in the book, he does say to Gandalf, like, because Gandalf shows up after Frodo has at one point to knock on the door after Frodo has been trying to give away all this stuff from Bilbo's house that Bilbo left for other people to take.
okay.
Um, and Frodo says to Gandalf, like, man, I really wanted to put on that ring and like disappear earlier today. And Gandalf was like, don't do that.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Uh, but he doesn't. So that's another thing that I thought was kind of interesting is that in the prologue and in the first chapter, it talks about how Gandalf was concerned about the ring, you know, and so in the prologue, he tells when it tells about Bilbo finding the ring, and it reiterates that Bilbo initially lied about how he got it. He originally told people that Gollum gave it to him as his like prize for winning the riddle game,
Mhm.
um, rather than what actually happened of Bilbo not telling him what he had in his pocket, Gollum
Mhm.
wanting to go find his ring so he could eat Bilbo, chasing each other, all of that.
Mhm.
Um, and it says that Gandalf disbelieved the story, and that Gandalf thought it important and disturbing to find that the good hobbit had not told the truth from the first. So it's like saying that Gandalf has been suspicious about this ring for 60 years, but hasn't necessarily done anything about it. And that's one thing that you find out from the appendices. And they do try to fit this into the Hobbit movies as far as like Gandalf is this is he knows that there are other rings of power in the world. Um and this could be one of those lesser rings that maybe it's nothing, you know.
Mhm.
But in the events of the Hobbit, when they I think is when Gandalf starts to realize that Saruman isn't being very forthright with them as far as he's very hesitant to try to get the necromancer out of Mirkwood at Dol Guldur, and that's when they eventually realize that it's actually Sauron there, and they banish him, but he really just pretends that he was defeated and like goes to Mordor. So I think right around there is Gandalf is sensing there's more darkness and evil in the world. Bilbo randomly finds this ring, and if it wasn't a ring that was a big deal, why would he feel the need to lie about it?
Mhm.
So you've got this like doubt being placed in Gandalf's mind, and I don't think he's like very suspicious of Saruman, but maybe there's maybe like a something in his heart about Saruman. And then with the events of after Bilbo's party, when he's like really struggling to give it up, and he
Mhm.
starts to use phrases like Gollum, like starts talking like Gollum, calling it his own and his precious. I think is when Gandalf decides that something is up, and he says to Frodo, "I've merely begun to wonder about the ring, especially since last night." I think that's maybe like an oversimplification for Frodo's sake, to maybe not alarm him, but I think that's the moment where Gandalf is like, "This
Mhm.
could be very bad."
Um, quick side note, what I liked about the additional little bits of Isildur's story in the extended version, I think Glead, Gleadriel,
Galadriel?
Gleadriel, just making sure I'm saying it right. Um, she talks about how Isildur went on his own thing. He was using the ring. She says it was precious to him.
Mm-hmm.
So then it ties that word to all of their obsessions with the ring, and I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a common it's like everybody that has it says that. I think Frodo eventually even says it. And or at least it's mine, my own, um, if not precious, you know? And I think it makes me wonder because the reason that Sauron is able to be destroyed with the destruction of the ring is that because he put so much of himself into it that he is, you know, and it's also interesting because Sauron is a Maiar in the same way that the Balrog and Gandalf and Sauron are all Maiar. They're all these like lesser gods, essentially. So Sauron, they're all technically, and Gandalf, like they're technically the same type of being, insofar as they don't die the same way that anyone else dies. So like elves' lifespans are tied to the lifespan of the earth, which is why they are immortal, right? But if like Eru Iluvatar decided to like the earth, then they would all die too. So they just kind of continue, and that's why they go whenever they feel really tired after like tens of thousands of years, they get to go to Valinor and be with the gods again, like they were at the beginning of time. Essentially. There's a little bit more to it than that, but that's the idea. Whereas Maiar, so like you see that in Gandalf when he fights the Balrog and then dies, and then God essentially is like, you know what? You a real one, Gandalf, and you're the only one doing your damn job. Yeah. So I'm gonna send you back to continue to do that. And with Sauron is why, like, he didn't die all these other times that he could have, because his spirit continues. But with after he's created the rings, I believe that it's like he's poured so much of himself into it that now his spirit is tied to it. So if it goes, then he goes too.
Okay. I'm following.
Yeah. So it's very interesting the way that magic and stuff works in Tolkien's world, because it's so, well, it's in Lord of the Rings anyway, it's like super subtle. But then in the Silmarillion, this is another thing that I would love to see in the Rings of Power. I don't know how they would, because it's mainly First Age stuff. In First Age, things are crazy. They're crazy. Like, Sauron is a vampire sometimes.
Ooh.
Yeah. Like, and Luthien can, like, just sing at you and win a battle. I don't know how it works. It's very, or she can like weave a coat out of her hair, and then you're not invisible, but you can't be seen, if that makes sense, if you're wearing the coat. And she can like, there are elves with the magic ability, like I think it's Finrod, Galadriel's brother, and people like Luthien, they can like change how they appear so that they can like be sneaky and like infiltrate the enemy sometimes. Okay. So there's like magic like that in the Silmarillion that doesn't happen in Lord of the Rings, and I'm like, are they gonna allude to any of that in Rings of Power? I have no clue, but it would be cool.
Of course.
If they did.
Fancy.
Yeah. I feel like this was a very unhinged look at the first two parts of Fellowship of the Ring.
Lots of streams of consciousness about.
Yeah. But that's the thing, is it's like, I knew I was worried about this one, because they're, by the movies adding in all that Second Age stuff, there is just
opens
so
up so much for you to talk about.
I know. And I apologize.
Don't apologize.
So I think maybe not every episode will be full of things, but this is how my brain works, and I feel like I have you trapped here for as long as I want you, so I get to brain dump all of that stuff. And I'm not saying that to you, listener, I'm saying that to you specifically, Anna.
That is my role. That is why I'm here.
Yes. So thank you so much for joining in on this wild and crazy adventure. We're having a lot of fun doing it. We're hoping to have some announcements about guests and that kind of thing soon. So stay tuned. Be sure to tune in next week for what happens next in the movie and then also in the book. And we will see you next week.